McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop, Season 5, Episode 11. A Dark and Lovely Dance. October 30th, 1921. Continued. Diary. It was a blustery night. Rainy. My feet had already begun to cramp because of the cute, strappy little black heels I'd put them in. It was in this state that Noble and I burst across the threshold of the Purgatory Club, wearing masquerade masks. We stepped inside the club. It was warm and dry and smelled of cigarette smoke. Curtains glowed in the light of the spotlights, and all around us, humans chattered. They glanced in curiosity or even mockery at our masks, because no one here in the human part of the club had been invited to the masquerade ball below. "Makes me nervous," I said to Noble, as we skittered through the crowd. "They're not acting like they've seen many guests wandering through here wearing masks." "Don't you think they're just being judgmental," he said, "of us, not the masks?" "Oh," I said. "Maybe so." I looped my arm through his. "Carry on, sir, until we meet our bitter doom." "Don't be dramatic about bitter doom when it could be right around the corner," Noble said. We were, of course, on our way to kidnap Octavia. As we marched towards the secret night enthusiast entrance, I felt for such a long time that cold droplets were still striking my skin that I finally reached down and rubbed my arms. Oh, of course, not indoor rain. Goosebumps. I was covered in goosebumps. I wanted Octavia on our side so desperately, and I was also as nervous as a canary in a cat's mouth. The bottle of the Octavia ghost rattled around in my satchel. How much longer would it be? And would this work? Noble and I stepped behind the curtain, but instead of the usual way to get into the night enthusiast speakeasy, a man stood there in a bowler hat, with a green vest and a bit of purple around his eyes. He was very large and intimidating. Noble removed his mask. The bouncer nodded at him right away. "Mr. James?" Noble put his mask back and just waited. I was shivery. Probably visibly. "Is she worried about something?" the bouncer said. "Just cold," I said, cheerfully. I didn't remove my mask. How could I? I wondered if Noble had a plan. He just stood there for a moment. Then he said abruptly, "What's the hold-up? Aren't you going to let us in?" The bouncer gestured at me. "Who's she?" "Date," Noble said simply to the bouncer. "She's one of us, brand new. I made her myself." "Oh, did you now?" I stood there pretending to purr and trying not to laugh as the man stepped aside with a flourish and let us in. I suppose, even in the night enthusiast world, Noble held a lot of respect and power. The bouncer didn't question him. Unless this was a trap. I thought about traps as we hurried down the murky underground hallway to the night enthusiast cave. I could already hear music crooning, its jazz reverberating off the walls of the tunnel, tinny and hollow and otherworldly. If this was a trap, this thing we were walking into, was it for both of us? Or was it just for me? We stepped into the cave a moment later. I was transfixed, I must admit. I prefer the sense of home and kindness that I get in the secret basement, but this was a bit thrilling. The last time I'd seen this cave, it had been murky with darkness. There's a darkness in caves that's unlike anything else. A pure, deep black. That darkness was still present, but now it glittered with purple string bulbs and emerald green lamps on every cocktail table. The lamps were strange copper apparatuses that made this look like the party of an undersea witch. A band played music in the corner. I wondered if they were night enthusiasts too, or if this was just the strangest gig they had ever gotten. As soon as Noble and I edged into the party, I began to feel safer. It was so dark here. We all wore masks. I could barely make out the dresses of the women 3 tables away. We were here to hide, to mingle, to party, but not to be seen. Almost as if the night enthusiasts were afraid of their very own faces. "Should we split up?" Noble said. "I know what you look like, and you know what I look like. If we only stop to talk to Octavia once we spot her, then she might be easier to find." "And just one of us is less intimidating than 2 of us," I said. If you find her first, Noble said, don't let her know it's you right away. How old do you think I am? I said. 5. Sorry, he said, with a grin. The grin looked a bit wicked under the mask. I'm a jangle of nerves, and I assume you are too. Let's find her, I said. As much as I want to stay for an hour and drink wicked cocktails, I think the sooner we leave the better. Agreed, Noble said. He stepped off into the crowd. For just a split second, pure terror shot through my veins. I felt it like a throb. What if he wasn't healed? What if this was the end of me? Then I felt security pour back in. There are a lot of things I'm not sure of, Diary. I'm sure a lot of things will go wrong before the end. But I knew Noble was himself. He was like a center of gravity to me, a reassurance that evil would not always win, that I was not alone. Diary, never underestimate the power of simply being a good human and simply existing. You will heal the world just by making toast. I wandered through the party. I swayed to the music, tried to act a little tipsy so people wouldn't be as threatened by me scanning them. I wanted to just look like a cheerful drunken girl who was curious about everything. I'm not sure what kind of job I did. I'm a goody two-shoes. That wine we'd had around the table in the boat was some of the first I'd ever had in my life. No one seemed to mind me, though. I wandered and searched, but Diary, it was so hard. A lot of the masks were huge, faces utterly concealed beneath them. The place was so dim. Features were hazy. I passed a few masks with long bird beaks on them. Ugh. If not for the tufts of 1920s haircuts or high heels, I would have been worried they were whiskelets weaving about with us. This wasn't working. A few yards away I spotted Noble, seeming equally lost. I paused for a moment to simply take in the enormity of my life. I needed to understand my trajectory, so I wouldn't feel so lost. The plan. Kidnap Octavia. Stop Wrath from dying. And then, oh, Diary, that makes my head spin. I've been so preoccupied with the fact that Noble is here, I have barely given any time to the truth. All of these people in the room with me, night enthusiasts old and new, were capable of healing. Gaining their souls back, the same way that Noble had. But how to convince them all? We could not unleash healing upon them with a weapon the way they'd unleashed destruction upon us. We couldn't snick a trigger and see it done. It had to be personal. Slow. And that was something that wasn't ultimately in my power. I knew I needed to find her. I still felt rumbly with nerves. Then I stopped trying to look for Octavia in the crowd and asked myself if I knew her well enough. Octavia, what would she wear? Octavia liked to express herself. Her dress would be a reflection of her personality. Well, did I know the personality enough to... It would be a white dress, with silver sparkles. I felt sure of it somehow. I wandered through the crowd. Not a lot of people were wearing white. That's why she would pick it, to stand out, like the ethereal ghost in my pocket. I spotted a girl at the back, small and willowy, sipping her drink slowly, like she had a lot to think about. That was my girl. I hurried up to her, and that's when I realized I wanted Octavia to like me, to trust me, so badly. I wanted her to know I cared about her. I reached her. She didn't look over at me, assuming I was a stranger. "Hi," I said, in a very fake voice. "Would you like to dance?" She glanced at me, looked me up and down. "How did you know I like girls?" I hadn't known that. "I was just hoping," I said. She squinted at the crowd. The group I used to belong to was much more accepting than this bunch. They'd be all right with it. It's legal to them, but they would still count me as a bit of a second-class citizen because of it. A bit wrong. Not as pure as they are. "Well," I said, "should we show them all wrong and dance anyway?" She stared at me for a long time. The eye holes of her mask hid her eyes for the most part, but I began to see a glitter through the mask, like light on water. "Yes," she said. "We shall dance." She reached out her hand and I took it. This didn't feel like hugging Noble. Touching him had felt familiar, safe, like being home. Touching Octavia felt strange, unearthly and sharp, but perhaps that was the lizard-like coldness of every night enthusiast. I felt like I was on a different planet or in a different timeline. A sort of horrible mirror world where things go wrong and you are forced to watch how badly your life might have gone. Friends, miserable. The good world you once inhabited, lost. But my good world wasn't lost. Not yet. I wasn't defeated, and I wasn't alone. Noble had regained his humanity apart from me. This wasn't a problem I had to fix by myself all alone, stone by stone. I was not the only force of good in the world, and that thought comforted me deeply, as I took both of Octavia's hands in mine, and we stepped out to dance. We were silent for about a minute, just dancing. Neither of us were particularly good, but maybe that's because two women dancing together weren't used to leading, and so we both led, and there were too many limbs. Out of the corner of my eye, in the shadow of the cave, I saw Noble watching us. He nodded once at me. He knew I'd found her. He was standing by. We listened to the jazz. Octavia broke our silence by abruptly saying, "You remind me of my dead friend." And then, diary, I don't know what came over me, but I became fierce. I wanted to surprise her. I dipped her backwards. "I am your dead friend." Octavia yelped. I swept her back up to her feet. "Be very, very quiet," I said. I tried to make it sound like I was threatening, dangerous, but of course I had no intention of hurting her one bit. "You must listen to me." "Maud?" she gasped. "Do as I say, or things will be just terrible," I said. Oh goodness, I was not good at threatening anyone. "I'm not here alone. Be quiet." "I'll be quiet," she said, but it was in such a strange tone of voice I couldn't tell if she was being sarcastic or not. "We're going to walk over there," I said. "To the door." I felt absolutely giddy, like my head was going to spin right off my shoulders. I had done precisely what Noble had just asked me not to do. What had I just retorted? "Do you think I'm 5? Oh dear. My pulse thumped. It had felt right at the time, exactly right. I had needed to tell her it was me. Now I felt so unsure. What had I done? We were in a room full of night enthusiasts. What was stopping her from screaming her head off? "Maud, you have to not let your heart take you away," I said to myself. "You told her because you were in the moment. Use your head, not your heart." Octavia and I walked to the far wall. Noble saw where we were headed and wove his way there as well. Octavia kept staring at my left hand, which was still looped through hers. I wondered what was about to happen. I wondered why I'd taken such a terrible risk. It was then that I realized, which you have probably already guessed, diary. I had a crush on Octavia. How many crushes can one girl have at once? But this was a different kind of thing. It was less about Octavia and more about acceptance in general. I worshipped her afar, and I just wanted some sort of token of light. I wanted to know if I was good enough. What if deep down I was oily and wrong? And that was the only reason Ariana loved me, because she was oily and wrong too. Noble was above all that. I felt safe with him. I knew he loved me, and I loved him back. As what I love him as, I am still muddy on, but I love him dearly. With Octavia, despite being turned into a night enthusiast against her will, she was something extraordinary. She's good, she is bright, she is remarkable. She is not oily and wrong. I think this is still just shame over liking women, feeling like I don't belong to either camp, like I'm some sort of traitor for having one foot on both sides. Of course there's nothing wrong. Of course I am whole and complete and not a tightrope walker. But I feel reluctance and shame. Perhaps I'm drawn to snakes like Ariana when I love women, because when I look in the mirror at Maud, who loves women, I see a snake. Something foul. My crush on Octavia wasn't about a lifetime of happiness. It was about one moment of acceptance. I wanted her to see me as something good. I wanted her to revel in me. Because if she found me lovely, then it would be a sign that I was. And I felt as if I needed it in order to move on, in order to say to myself, "You are a gem. Be at peace." Octavia and I reached a dark corner of the cave where the music was quiet and very few people were around. Noble hung back, not sure where Octavia and I were at with introductions. "What are you going to do?" Octavia said, rather serenely. "Are you going to stab me?" "No," I said. I reached into my satchel. I didn't know what else to do. I was getting nervous, and we had always known we were going to just do this, because if we asked, she would probably say no, and... I slipped my fingers around the cork of the ghost bottle and gave it a gentle tug. As I did it, I knew I was doing something wrong. What could be wrong about giving someone their humanity again? But a voice seemed to whisper in me, like an evil omen. She didn't agree. And the voice faded, as the silver dust of Octavia's ghost shot straight into her. Noble reached my side, having seen the ghost. I wondered if he would be wildly angry with me for jumping the gun, but he just put his hand on my shoulder and gripped hard. Octavia stood there staring for just a moment. Then she shuddered. She looked up into my eyes with a curious expression. "You put it back?" "Yes," I said, relieved. This ghost seemed to have done the same thing as the last one. She frowned at me. "Maud, I have something to show you. Something really terrible that Ariana is doing. You'd better come with me." Noble and I glanced at each other. This was the beginning of something. Was Octavia herself again? Was all well? Octavia didn't wait for us to respond. She hurried through the dark cave out the tunnel. We followed her because we simply couldn't let her out of our sight. She didn't stop until she was out in the dark, rainy street, and then all of us stood there, in our masquerade gear. "Noble, you're with us again?" she said. "Somehow. Very good. Well, Maud, we have a sort of office now. Noble, you weren't in on this because Ariana never trusted you. Inner circle stuff. The thing I have to show you is there. Here's a photo of the main room of the office." She flipped through a book and showed us quickly. "Let's teleport, now." Noble and I glanced at each other. She was showing us how to get to a secret office. This was good. We disappeared, one after the other, in tiny blips. The office was dark and a bit humid. It smelled of old wood polish and paper. Bankers' lamps sat on desks. Rain clattered against the dark windows, and the streetlights gleamed beyond. The night enthusiasts had an office. How boring. Reminded me of Mr. Levy. "Here." Octavia hurried down the hall to a kind of vault with a barred metal door. She stepped in first, pointing to a stack of papers. "It's there. Do you see it?" All three of us stepped inside. A kind of electric hum seemed to pass through the room. I stepped up to the stack of papers, but Noble didn't. He stared at Octavia, as she jumped back outside and slammed the door on us. He lunged for her. She held the door firmly in place. "You can't teleport," she said. "The room is magicked." "Octavia," I said, "why are you doing this?" "Maud, I'm very confused," Octavia said. "I feel everything again. I am myself again, or at least, I have all the same depth as I did before the night enthusiasts made me shallow. But now all that emotion and loyalty and passion and pain is on the side of the night enthusiasts. I don't understand that entirely. I think I need to have a good sit-down and sort through everything I'm feeling. But for now, I'm still a night enthusiast. I'm still loyal to them." She slammed the door shut and locked it with a furious twist of her wrist. "So stay in here while I go fetch Ariana." We hope you've enjoyed Season 5, Episode 11, A Dark and Lovely Dance, of McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop is written and performed by Minerva Sweeney Wren, all rights reserved. Thank you for continuing all this way with Maud's adventures. New audio dramas are coming, and there is news on those, as well as fandom fun, if you follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Meg Macaulay Inc. That's Inc, I-N-K. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon, or, if you can't commit right now, say thank you with a one-time donation. I now have Venmo, at Minerva Sweeney Wren. All links are in the description of this episode. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop will continue with Season 5, Episode 12. The China Eye is gone.